Srimad Bhagavatam, First Canto. His Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga, Srimad Bhagavatam of Krishna Dvapayana Vyasa. First Canto, Creation. Translation and elaborate purports by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Founder Acharya of the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. To Srila Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja, my spiritual master, on the 26th annual ceremony of his disappearance day, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. Preface. We must know the present need of human society, and what is that need? Human society is no longer bounded by geographical limits to particular countries or communities. Human society is broader than in the Middle Ages, and the world tendency is toward one state or one human society. The ideals of spiritual communism, according to Srimad Bhagavatam, are based more or less on the oneness of the entire human society, nay, of the entire energy of living beings. The need is felt by great thinkers to make this a successful ideology. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need in human society. It begins, therefore, with an aphorism of Vedanta philosophy, Janmade Asya Yata, to establish the ideal of a common cause. Human society at the present moment is not in the darkness of oblivion. It has made rapid progress in the fields of material comforts, education, and economic development throughout the entire world, but there is a pinprick somewhere in the social body at large, and therefore there are large-scale quarrels, even over less important issues. There is need of a clue as to how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, and prosperity with a common cause. Srimad Bhagavatam will fill this need, for it is a cultural presentation for the re-spiritualization of the entire human society. Srimad Bhagavatam should be introduced also in the schools and colleges, for it is recommended by the great student devotee Prahlada Maharaja in order to change the demoniac face of society. Kumara achareto prajno dharman bhagavatan iha durlabam manusham janma tadapi adruvam arthadam. Bhagavad Gita 761. Disparity in human society is due to lack of principles in a godless civilization. There is God, or the Almighty One, from whom everything emanates, by whom everything is maintained, and in whom everything is merged to rest. Material science has tried to find the ultimate source of creation very insufficiently, but it is a fact that there is one ultimate source of everything that be. The ultimate source is explained rationally and authoritatively in the beautiful Bhagavatam, or Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is the transcendental science, not only for knowing the ultimate source of everything, but also for knowing our relation with him, and our duty toward perfection of the human society on the basis of this perfect knowledge. It is powerful reading matter in the Sanskrit language, and it is now rendered into English elaborately, so that simply by a careful reading one will know God perfectly well, so much so that the reader will be sufficiently educated to defend himself from the onslaught of atheists. Over and above this, the reader will be able to convert others to accepting God as a concrete principle. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the definition of the ultimate source. It is a bona fide commentary on the Vedanta Sutra by the same author, Srila Vyasadeva, and gradually it develops into 9 cantos up to the highest state of God realization. The only qualification one needs to study this great book of transcendental knowledge is to proceed step by step, cautiously, and not jump forward haphazardly, as with an ordinary book. It should be gone through chapter by chapter, one after another. The reading matter is so arranged with the original Sanskrit text, its English transliteration, synonyms, translation, and purports, so that one is sure to become a God-realized soul at the end of finishing the first 9 cantos. The 10th canto is distinct from the first 9 cantos because it deals directly with the transcendental activities of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. one will be unable to capture the effects of the 10th canto without going through the first 9 cantos. The book is complete in 12 cantos, each independent, but it is good for all to read them in small installments, one after another. I must admit my frailties in presenting Srimad Bhagavatam, but still I am hopeful of its good reception by the thinkers and leaders of society on the strength of the following statement of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.11. On the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, and pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a transcendental creation meant for bringing about a revolution in the impious life of a misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literature, even though irregularly composed, is heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Om Tat Sat. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Forward. This Bhagavata Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.43. The timeless wisdom of India is expressed in the Vedas, ancient Sanskrit texts which touch upon all fields of human knowledge. Originally preserved through oral tradition, the Vedas were first put into writing 5,000 years ago by Srila Vyasadeva, the literary incarnation of God. After compiling the Vedas, Vyasadeva set forth their essence in the aphorisms known as the Vedanta Sutras. Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavata Purana, is Vyasadeva's commentary on his own Vedanta Sutras. It was written in the maturity of his spiritual life under the direction of Narada Muni, his spiritual master. Referred to as the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic literature, Srimad Bhagavatam is the most complete and authoritative exposition of Vedic knowledge. After compiling the Bhagavatam, Vyasa imparted the synopsis of it to his son, the sage Sukadeva Goswami. Sukadeva Goswami subsequently recited the entire Bhagavatam to Maharaja Parikshit in an assembly of learned saints on the bank of the Ganges at Hastinapura, now Delhi. Maharaja Parikshit was the emperor of the world and was a great Rajarsi, saintly king. Having received a warning that he would die within a week, he renounced his entire kingdom and retired to the bank of the Ganges to fast until death and receive spiritual enlightenment. The Bhagavatam begins with Emperor Parikshit's sober inquiry to Sukadeva Goswami. You are the spiritual master of great saints and devotees. I am therefore begging you to show the way of perfection for all persons, and especially for one who is about to die. Please let me know what a man should hear, chant, remember, and worship, and also what he should not do. Please explain all this to me. Sukadeva Goswami's answer to this question and numerous other questions posed by Maharaja Parikshit concerning everything from the nature of the self to the origin of the universe held the assembled sages in rapt attention continuously for the 7 days leading up to the king's death. The sage Sutta Goswami, who was present in that assembly when Sukadeva Goswami first recited Srimad Bhagavatam, later repeated the Bhagavatam before a gathering of sages in the forest of Naimisaranya. Those sages, concerned about the spiritual welfare of the people in general, had gathered to perform a long continuous chain of sacrifices to counteract the degrading influence of the incipient age of Kali. In response to the sage's request that he speak the essence of Vedic wisdom, Sutta Goswami repeated from memory the entire 18,000 verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, as spoken by Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaja Parikshit. The reader of Srimad Bhagavatam hears Sutta Goswami relate the questions of Maharaja Parikshit and the answers of Sukadeva Goswami. Also, Sutta Goswami sometimes responds directly to questions put by Sanaka Rishi, the spokesman for the sages gathered at Naimisaranya. One therefore simultaneously hears two dialogues, one between Maharaja Parikshit and Sukadeva Goswami on the bank of the Ganges, and another at Naimisaranya between Sutta Goswami and the sages of Naimisaranya forest, headed by Sanaka Rishi. Furthermore, while instructing King Parikshit, Sukadeva Goswami often relates historical episodes and gives accounts of lengthy philosophical discussions between such great souls as Narada Muni and Vasudeva. With this understanding of the history of the Bhagavatam, the reader will easily be able to follow its intermingling of dialogues and events from various sources, since philosophical wisdom, not chronological order, is most important in the text. One need only be attentive to the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam to appreciate fully its profound message. The translators of this edition compare the Bhagavatam to sugar candy. Wherever you taste it, you will find it equally sweet and relishable. Therefore, to taste the sweetness of the Bhagavatam, one may begin by reading any of its volumes. After such an introductory taste, however, the serious reader is best advised to go back to the first canto and then proceed through the Bhagavatam canto after canto in its natural order. This edition of the Bhagavatam is the first complete English translation of this important text with an elaborate commentary, and it is the first widely available to the English-speaking public. The first 12 volumes, Canto 1 through Canto 10, Part 1, are the product of the scholarly and devotional effort of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and the world's most distinguished teacher of Indian religious and philosophical thought. His consummate Sanskrit scholarship and intimate familiarity with Vedic culture and thought, as well as the modern way of life, combined to reveal to the West a magnificent exposition of this important classic. After the departure of Srila Prabhupada from this world in 1977, his monumental work of translating and annotating Srimad Bhagavatam has been continued by his disciples Hridayananda Dasha Goswami and Gopiparanadana Dasa. Readers will find this work of value for many reasons. For those interested in the classical roots of Indian civilization, it serves as a vast reservoir of detailed information on virtually every one of its aspects. For students of comparative philosophy and religion, the Bhagavatam offers a penetrating view into the meaning of India's profound spiritual heritage. To sociologists and anthropologists, the Bhagavatam reveals the practical workings of a peaceful and scientifically organized Vedic culture, whose institutions were integrated on the basis of a highly developed spiritual worldview. Students of literature will discover the Bhagavatam to be a masterpiece of majestic poetry. For students of psychology, the text provides important perspectives on the nature of consciousness, human behavior, and the philosophical study of identity. Finally, to those seeking spiritual insight, the Bhagavatam offers simple and practical guidance for attainment of the highest self-knowledge and realization of the Absolute Truth. The entire multi-volume text, presented by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, promises to occupy a significant place in the intellectual, cultural, and spiritual life of modern man for a long time to come. The Publishers. Introduction. The conception of God and the conception of absolute truth are not on the same level. The Srimad Bhagavatam hits on the target of the absolute truth. The conception of God indicates the controller, whereas the conception of the absolute truth indicates the summum bonum of the ultimate source of all energies. There is no difference of opinion about the personal feature of God as the controller, because a controller cannot be impersonal. Of course, modern government, especially democratic government, is impersonal to some extent, but ultimately the chief executive head is a person, and the impersonal feature of government is subordinate to the personal feature. So without a doubt, whenever we refer to control over others, we must admit the existence of a personal feature. Because there are different controllers for different managerial positions, there may be many small gods. According to the Bhagavad Gita, any controller who has some specific extraordinary power is called a Vibhutimat Sattva, or controller empowered by the Lord. There are many Vibhutimattattvas, controllers or gods with various specific powers, but the absolute truth is one without a second. This Srimad Bhagavatam designates the absolute truth, or the summum bonum, as the Param Satyam. The author of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva, first offers his respectful obeisances unto the Param Satyam, absolute truth, and because the Param Satyam is the ultimate source of all energies, the Param Satyam is the Supreme Person. The gods or the controllers are undoubtedly persons, but the Param Satyam, from whom the gods derive powers of control, is the Supreme Person. The Sanskrit word Ishvara, controller, conveys the import of God, but the Supreme Person is called the Parameshvara, or the Supreme Ishvara. The Supreme Person, or Parameshvara, is the Supreme Conscious Personality, and because he does not derive any power from any other source, he is supremely independent. In the Vedic literatures, Brahma is described as the supreme god, or the head of all other gods like Indra, Chandra, and Varuna, but the Srimad Bhagavatam confirms that even Brahma is not independent as far as his power and knowledge are concerned. He received knowledge in the form of the Vedas from the Supreme Person, who resides within the heart of every living being. That Supreme Personality knows everything directly and indirectly. Individual infinitesimal persons who are parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality may know directly and indirectly everything about their bodies or external features, but the Supreme Personality knows everything about both his external and internal features. The words Janmadi Asya suggest that the source of all production, maintenance, or destruction is the same Supreme Conscious Person. Even in our present experience, we can know that nothing is generated from inert matter, but inert matter can be generated from the living entity. For instance, by contact with the living entity, the material body develops into a working machine. Men with a poor fund of knowledge mistake the bodily machinery to be the living being, but the fact is that the living being is the basis of the bodily machine. The bodily machine is useless as soon as the living spark is away from it. Similarly, the original source of all material energy is the Supreme Person. This fact is expressed in all the Vedic literatures, and all the exponents of spiritual science have accepted this truth. The living force is called Brahman, and one of the greatest acharyas, teachers, namely Sripada Shankaracharya, has preached that Brahman is substance, whereas the cosmic world is category. The original source of all energies is the living force, and he is logically accepted as the Supreme Person. He is therefore conscious of everything past, present, and future, and also of each and every corner of his manifestations, both material and spiritual. An imperfect living being does not even know what is happening within his own personal body. He eats his food, but does not know how this food is transformed into energy or how it sustains his body. When a living being is perfect, he is aware of everything that happens, and since the Supreme Person is all perfect, it is quite natural that he knows everything in all detail. Consequently, the perfect personality is addressed in the Srimad Bhagavatam as Vasudeva, or one who lives everywhere, in full consciousness and in full possession of his complete energy. All of this is clearly explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and the reader has ample opportunity to study this critically. In the modern age, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu preached the Srimad Bhagavatam by practical demonstration. It is easier to penetrate into the topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam through the medium of Sri Chaitanya's causeless mercy. Therefore, a short sketch of his life and precepts is inserted herein to help the reader understand the real merit of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is imperative that one learn the Srimad Bhagavatam from the person Bhagavatam. The person Bhagavatam is one whose very life is Srimad Bhagavatam in practice. Since Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the absolute personality of Godhead, he is both Bhagavan and Bhagavatam in person and sound. Therefore, his process of approaching the Srimad Bhagavatam is practical for all people of the world. It was his wish that the Srimad Bhagavatam preached in every nook and corner of the world by those who happened to take their birth in India. The Srimad Bhagavatam is the science of Krishna, the absolute personality of Godhead, of whom we have preliminary information from the text of the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that anyone, regardless of what he is, who is well versed in the science of Krishna, Srimad Bhagavatam, and Bhagavad Gita, can become an authorized preacher or preceptor in the science of Krishna. There is a need for the science of Krishna in the human society for the good of all suffering humanity of the world, and we simply request the leaders of all nations to pick up the science of Krishna for their own good, for the good of society, and for the good of all the world's people. A short sketch of the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the great apostle of love of God and the father of the congregational chanting of the holy names of the Lord, advented himself as Sridhama Mayapura, a quarter in the city of Navadvipi in Bengal, in the Falguni Purnima evening in the year 1407 Shakabda, corresponding to February 1486 by the Christian calendar. His father Sri Jagannatha Misra, a learned Brahmana from the district of Sylhet, came to Navadvipa as a student because at the time Navadvipa was considered to be the center of education and culture. He domiciled on the banks of the Ganges after marrying Srimati Sachidevi, a daughter of Srila Nilambara Chakravarti, the great learned scholar of Navadvipa. Jagannatha Misra had a number of daughters by his wife, Srimati Sachidevi, and most of them expired at an early age. Two surviving sons, Sri Vishvarupa and Vishvambara, became at last the object of their parental affection. The 10th and youngest son, who was named Vishvambara, later became known as Nimai Pandita, and then, after accepting the renounced order of life, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu exhibited his transcendental activities for 48 years, and then disappeared in the year 1455, Sakabda at Puri. For his first 24 years, he remained at Navadvipa as a student and householder. His first wife was Srimati Lakshmipriya, who died at an early age when the Lord was away from home. When he returned from East Bengal, he was requested by his mother to accept a second wife, and he agreed. His second wife was Srimati Vishnupriya Devi, who bore the separation of the Lord throughout her life, because the Lord took the order of sannyasa at the age of 24, when Srimati Vishnupriya was barely 16 years old. After taking sannyasa, the Lord made his headquarters at Jagannathapuri, due to the request of his mother, Srimati Sachidevi. The Lord remained for 24 years at Puri. For 6 years of this time, he traveled continuously all over India, and especially throughout southern India, preaching the Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya not only preached the Srimad Bhagavatam, but propagated the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita as well in the most practical way. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Sri Krishna is depicted as the absolute personality of Godhead, and his last teachings in that great book of transcendental knowledge instruct that one should give up all the modes of religious activities and accept him, Lord Sri Krishna, as the only worshipable Lord. The Lord then assured that all his devotees should be protected from all sorts of sinful acts, and that for them there should be no cause for anxiety. Unfortunately, despite Lord Sri Krishna's direct order and the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, less intelligent people misunderstand him to be nothing but a great historical personality, and thus they cannot accept him as the original personality of Godhead. Such men with poor fund of knowledge are misled by many non-devotees. Thus the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita were misinterpreted even by great scholars. After the disappearance of Lord Sri Krishna, there were hundreds of commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita by many erudite scholars, and almost every one of them was motivated by self-interest. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the self-same Lord Sri Krishna. This time, however, he appeared as a great devotee of the Lord in order to preach to the people in general, as well as to religionists and philosophers, about the transcendental position of Sri Krishna, the primeval Lord, and the cause of all causes. The essence of his preaching is that Lord Sri Krishna, who appeared at Vrajabhumi, Vrindavana, as the son of the king of Vraja, Nanda Maharaja, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is therefore worshipable by all. Vrindavana Dhamma is non-different from the Lord because the same fame, form, and place where the Lord manifests himself are all identical with the Lord as absolute knowledge. Therefore, Vrindavana Dhamma is worshipable as the Lord. The highest form of transcendental worship of the Lord was exhibited by the damsels of Vrajabhumi in the form of pure affection for the Lord, and Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends this process as the most excellent mode of worship. He accepts the Srimad Bhagavata Purana as the spotless literature for understanding the Lord, and he preaches that the ultimate goal of life for all human beings is to attain the stage of prema, or love of God. Many devotees of Lord Chaitanya, like Srila Vrindavana Dasha Thakura, Sri Lokanadasa Thakura, Srila Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami, Sri Kavikarnapura, Sri Prabodhananda Sarasvati, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Sanatana Goswami, Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, Sri Jiva Goswami, Sri Gopala Bhatta Goswami, Sri Raghunatha Dasa Goswami, and in this latter age, within 200 years, Sri Vishwanatha Chakravarti, Sri Baladeva Vidyabhusana, Sri Shamananda Goswami, Sri Narottama Dasa Thakura, Sri Bhaktivinoda Thakura, and at last Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, our spiritual master, and many other great and renowned scholars and devotees of the Lord have preached voluminous books and literatures on the life and precepts of the Lord. Such literatures are all based on the Shastras like the Vedas, Puranas, Upanishads, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and other histories and authentic literatures approved by the recognized acharyas. They are unique in composition and unrivaled in presentation, and they are full of transcendental knowledge. Unfortunately, the people of the world are still ignorant of them, but when these literatures, which are mostly in Sanskrit and Bengali, come to light the world, and when they are presented before thinking people, then India's glory and the message of love will overflood this morbid world, which is vainly searching after peace and prosperity by various illusory methods, not approved by the acharyas in the chain of disciplic succession. The readers of this small description of the life and precepts of Lord Chaitanya will profit much to go through the books of Srila Vrindavana Dasha Thakura, Sri Chaitanya Bhagavata, and Srila Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami, Sri Chaitanya Karitamrita. The early life of the Lord is most fascinatingly expressed by the author of Chaitanya Bhagavata, and as far as the teachings are concerned, they are more vividly explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now they are available to the English-speaking public in our teachings of Lord Chaitanya. The Lord's early life was recorded by one of his chief devotees and contemporaries, namely Srila Murari Gupta, a medical practitioner of that time, and the latter part of the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was recorded by his private secretary, Sri Damodara Goswami, or Srila Svarupa Damodara, who was practically a constant companion of the Lord at Puri. These two devotees recorded practically all the incidents of the Lord's activities, and later on all the books dealing with the Lord, which are above mentioned, were composed on the basis of Kadachas, notebooks by Srila Damodara Goswami and Murari Gupta. So the Lord advented himself on the Falguni Purnima evening of 1407 Sakabda, and it was by the will of the Lord that there was a lunar eclipse on that evening. During the hours of eclipse, it was the custom of the Hindu public to take bath in the Ganges or any other sacred river and chant the Vedic mantras for purification. When Lord Chaitanya was born during the lunar eclipse, all India was roaring with the holy sound of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. These 16 names of the Lord are mentioned in many Puranas and Upanishads, and they are described as the Taraka Brahmanama of this age. It is recommended in the Shastras that offenseless chanting of these holy names of the Lord can deliver a fallen soul from material bondage. There are innumerable names of the Lord both in India and outside, and all of them are equally good because all of them indicate the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But because these 16 are especially recommended for this age, people should take advantage of them and follow the path of the great acharyas who attain success by practicing the rules of the Shastras, revealed scriptures. The simultaneous occurrence of the Lord's appearance and the lunar eclipse indicated the distinctive mission of the Lord. This mission was to preach the importance of chanting the holy names of the Lord in this age of Kali, quarrel. In this present age, quarrels take place even over trifles, and therefore the Shastras have recommended for this age a common platform for realization, namely chanting the holy names of the Lord. People can hold meetings to glorify the Lord in their respective languages and with melodious songs, and if such performances are executed in an offenseless manner, it is certain that the participants will gradually attain spiritual perfection without having to undergo more rigorous methods. At such meetings, everyone, the learned and the foolish, the rich and the poor, the Hindus and the Muslims, the Englishmen and the Indians, and the Chandalas and the Brahmanas can all hear the transcendental sounds, and thus cleanse the dust of material association from the mirror of the heart. To confirm the Lord's mission, all the people of the world will accept the holy name of the Lord as the common platform for the universal religion of mankind. In other words, the advent of the holy name took place along with the advent of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When the Lord was on the lap of his mother, he would at once stop crying. As soon as the ladies surrounding him chanted the holy names and clapped their hands, this peculiar incident was observed by the neighbors with awe and veneration. Sometimes the young girls took pleasure in making the Lord cry and then stopping him by chanting the holy name. So from his very childhood, the Lord began to preach the importance of the holy name. In his early age, Lord Sri Chaitanya was known as Nimai. His name was given by his beloved mother because the Lord took his birth beneath a nimba tree in the courtyard of his paternal house. When the Lord was offered solid food at the age of 6 months in the Annaprasana ceremony, the Lord indicated his future activities. At this time, it was customary to offer the child both coins and books in order to get some indication of the future tendencies of the child. The Lord was offered on one side coins and on the other the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Lord accepted the Bhagavatam instead of the coins. When he was a mere baby crawling in the yard, one day a snake appeared before him, and the Lord began to pray with it. All the members of the house were struck with fear and awe, but after a little while the snake went away, and the baby was taken away by his mother. Once he was stolen by a thief who intended to steal his ornaments, but the Lord took a pleasure trip on the shoulder of the bewildered thief, who was searching for a solitary place in order to rob the baby. It so happened that the thief, wandering hither and thither, finally arrived just before the house of Jagannatha Misra, and being afraid of being caught, dropped the baby at once. Of course, the anxious parents and relatives were glad to see the lost child. Once a pilgrim Brahmana was received at the house of Jagannatha Misra, and when he was offering food to the Godhead, the Lord appeared before him and partook of the prepared food. The edibles had to be rejected because the child touched them, and so the Brahmana had to make another preparation. The next time the same thing happened, and when this happened repeatedly for the third time, the baby was finally put to bed. At about 12 at night, when all the members of the house were fast asleep, within their closed rooms, the pilgrim Brahmana offered his specially prepared foods to the deity, and in the same way the baby Lord appeared before the pilgrim and spoiled his offerings. The Brahmana then began to cry, but since everyone was fast asleep, no one could hear him. At that time, the baby Lord appeared before the fortunate Brahmana and disclosed his identity as Krishna himself. The Brahmana was forbidden to disclose this incident, and the baby returned to the lap of his mother. There are many similar incidents in his childhood. As a naughty boy, he sometimes used to tease the orthodox Brahmanas who used to bathe in the Ganges. When the Brahmanas complained to his father that he was splashing them with water instead of attending school, the Lord suddenly appeared before his father as though just coming from school with all his school clothes and books. At the bathing ghata, he also used to play jokes on the neighboring girls who engaged in worshipping Shiva in hopes of getting good husbands. This is a common practice amongst unmarried girls in Hindu families. While they were engaged in such worship, the Lord naughtily appeared before them and said, "My dear sisters, please give me all the offerings you have just brought for Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is my devotee, and Parvati is my maidservant. If you worship me, then Lord Shiva and all the other demigods will be more satisfied." Some of them refused to obey the naughty Lord, and he would curse them that due to their refusal they would be married to old men who had 7 children by their previous wives. Out of fear and sometimes out of love, the girls would also offer him various goods, and then the Lord would bless them and assure them that they would have very good young husbands, and that they would be mothers of dozens of children. The blessings would enliven the girls, but they used often to complain of these incidents to their mothers. In this way the Lord passed his early childhood. When he was just 16 years old, he started his own Chatushpathi village school, conducted by a learned Brahmana. In this school he would simply explain Krishna even in readings of grammar. Srila Jiva Goswami, in order to please the Lord, later composed a grammar in Sanskrit, in which all the rules of grammar were explained with examples that used the holy names of the Lord. This grammar is still current. It is known as Harinamamrita Vyakarana and is prescribed in the syllabus of schools in Bengal. During this time, a great Kashmir scholar named Keshava Kashmiri came to Navadvipa to hold discussions on the Shastras. The Kashmir Pandita was a champion scholar, and he had traveled to all places of learning in India. Finally, he came to Navadvipa to contest the learned Panditas there. The Panditas of Navadvipa decided to match the Nimai Pandita, Lord Chaitanya, with the Kashmir Pandita, thinking that if Nimai Pandita were defeated, they would have another chance to debate with the scholar, for Nimai Pandita was only a boy, and if the Kashmir Pandita were defeated, then they would even be more glorified, because people would proclaim that a mere boy of Navadvipa had defeated a champion scholar who was famous throughout India. It so happened that Nimai Pandita met Keshava Kashmiri while strolling on the banks of the Ganges. The Lord requested him to compose a Sanskrit verse in praise of the Ganges, and the Pandita within a short time composed 100 slokas, reciting the verses like a storm and showing the strength of his vast learning. Nimai Pandita at once memorized all the slokas without an error. He quoted the 64th sloka and pointed out certain rhetorical and literary irregularities. He particularly questioned the Pandita's use of the word Bhavani Bhartu. He pointed out that the use of this word was redundant. Bhavani means the wife of Shiva, and who else can be her Bharata or husband? He also pointed out several other discrepancies, and the Kashmir Pandita was struck with wonder. He was astonished that a mere student of grammar could point out the literary mistakes of an erudite scholar. Although this matter was ended prior to any public meeting, the news spread like wildfire all over Navadvipa. But finally Keshava Kashmiri was ordered in a dream by Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, to submit to the Lord, and thus the Kashmir Pandita became a follower of the Lord. The Lord was then married with great pomp and gaiety, and at this time he began to preach the holy name of the Lord at Navadvipa. Some of the Brahmanas became envious of his popularity, and they put many hindrances on his path. They were so jealous that they finally took the matter before the Muslim magistrate at Navadvipa. Bengal was then governed by Pathans, and the governor of the province was Nawab Hussain Shah. The Muslim magistrate at Navadvipa took up the complaints of the Brahmanas seriously, and at first he warned the followers of Nimai Pandita not to chant loudly the name of Hari. But Lord Chaitanya asked his followers to disobey the orders of the Qazi, and they went on with their Shankirtana chanting party as usual. The magistrate then sent constables who interrupted a Sankirtana and broke some of the mridangas, drums. When Nimai Pandita heard of this incident, he organized a party for civil disobedience. He is the pioneer of the civil disobedience movement in India for the right cause. He organized a procession of 100,000 men with thousands of mridangas and karatalas, hand cymbals, and this procession passed over the roads of Navadvipa in defiance of the Qazi, who had issued the order. Finally, the procession reached the house of the Qazi, who went upstairs out of fear of the masses. The great crowds assembled at the Qazi's house displayed a violent temper, but the Lord asked them to be peaceful. At this time the Qazi came down and tried to pacify the Lord by addressing him as nephew. He pointed out that he referred to Nilambara Chakravarti as uncle, and thus Srimati Sachidevi, Nimai Pandita's mother, was his cousin, sister. He asked the Lord whether his sister's son could be angry at his maternal uncle, and the Lord replied that since the Qazi was his maternal uncle, he should receive his nephew well at his home. In this way the issue was mitigated, and the two learned scholars began a long discussion on the Quran and the Hindu Shastras. The Lord raised the question of cow killing, and the Qazi properly answered him by referring to the Quran. In turn, the Qazi also questioned the Lord about cow sacrifice in the Vedas, and the Lord replied that such sacrifice as mentioned in the Vedas is not actually cow killing. In that sacrifice, an old bull or cow was sacrificed for the sake of receiving a fresh, younger life by the power of Vedic mantras. But in the Kali Yuga, such cow sacrifices are forbidden because there are no qualified brahmanas capable of conducting such a sacrifice. In fact, in Kali Yuga, all yajnas, sacrifices, are forbidden because they are useless attempts by foolish men. In Kali Yuga, only the Sankirtana yajna is recommended for all practical purposes. Speaking in this way, the Lord finally convinced the Qazi, who became the Lord's follower. The Qazi thenceforth declared that no one should hinder the Sankirtana movement, which was started by the Lord, and the Qazi left this order in his will for the sake of progeny. The Qazi's tomb still exists in the area of Navadvipa, and Hindu pilgrims go there to show their respects. The Qazi's descendants are residents, and they never objected to Sankirtana, even during the Hindu-Muslim riot days. The incident shows clearly that the Lord was not a so-called timid Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is a fearless devotee of the Lord, and for the right cause he can take any step suitable for the purpose. Arjuna was also a Vaishnava devotee of Lord Krishna, and he fought valiantly for the satisfaction of the Lord. Similarly, Vajrangaji or Hanuman was also a devotee of Lord Rama, and he gave lessons to the non-devotee party of Ravana. The principles of Vaishnavism are to satisfy the Lord by all means. A Vaishnava is by nature a non-violent, peaceful living being, and he has all the good qualities of God. But when the non-devotee blasphemes the Lord or his devotee, the Vaishnava never tolerates such impudency. After this incident, the Lord began to preach and propagate his Bhagavata Dharma, or Sankirtana movement, more vigorously, and whoever stood against this propagation of the Yoga Dharma, or duty of the age, was properly punished by various types of chastisement. Two Brahmana gentlemen named Kapala and Gopala, who also happened to be maternal uncles of the Lord, were inflicted with leprosy by way of chastisement, and later, when they were repentant, they were accepted by the Lord. In the course of his preaching work, he used to send daily all his followers, including Srira Nityananda Prabhu and Thakura Hridasa, two chief whips of his party, from door to preach the Srimad Bhagavatam. All of Navadvipa was surcharged with his Sankirtana movement, and his headquarters were situated at the house of Srivasa Thakura and Sri Advaita Prabhu, two of his chief householder disciples. These two learned heads of the Brahmana community were the most ardent supporters of Lord Chaitanya's movement. Sri Advaita Prabhu was the chief cause for the advent of the Lord. When Advaita Prabhu saw that the total human society was full of materialistic activities and devoid of devotional service, which alone could save mankind from the threefold miseries of material existence, He, out of his causeless compassion for the age-worn human society, prayed fervently for the incarnation of the Lord, and continually worshipped the Lord with water of the Ganges and leaves of the holy Tulasi tree. As far as preaching work in the Sankirtana movement was concerned, everyone was expected to do his daily share according to the order of the Lord. Once Nityananda Prabhu and Srila Haridasa Thakura were walking down a main road, and on the way they saw a roaring crowd assembled. Upon inquiring from passers-by, they understood that two brothers, named Jagai and Madai, were creating a public disturbance in a drunken state. They also heard that these two brothers were born in a respectable Brahmana family, but because of low association they had turned into debauchees of the worst type. They were not only drunkards, but also meat-eaters, woman-hunters, dacoits, and sinners of all description. Srila Nityananda Prabhu heard all of these stories and decided that these two fallen souls must be the first to be delivered. If they were delivered from their sinful life, then the good name of Lord Chaitanya would be even still more glorified. Thinking in this way, Nityananda Prabhu and Haridasa pushed their way through the crowd and asked the two brothers to chant the holy name of Lord Hari. The drunken brothers became enraged upon this request and attacked Nityananda Prabhu with filthy language. Both brothers chased them a considerable distance. In the evening, the report of the preaching work was submitted to the Lord, and he was glad to learn that Nityananda and Haridasa had attempted to deliver such a stupid pair of fellows. The next day, Nityananda Prabhu went to see the brothers, and as soon as he approached them, one of them threw a piece of earthen pot at him. This struck him on the forehead, and immediately blood began to flow. But Nityananda Prabhu was so kind that instead of protesting this heinous act, he said, "It does not matter that you have thrown this stone at me. I still request you to chant the holy name of Lord Hari." One of the brothers, Jagai, was astonished to see this behavior of Nityananda Prabhu, and he at once fell down at his feet and asked him to pardon his sinful brother. When Madai again attempted to hurt Nityananda Prabhu, Jagai stopped him and implored him to fall down at his feet. In the meantime, the news of Nityananda's injury reached the Lord, who at once hurried to the spot in a fiery and angry mood. The Lord immediately invoked his Sudarsana Chakra, the Lord's ultimate weapon shaped like a wheel, to kill the sinners, but Nityananda Prabhu reminded him of his mission. The mission of the Lord was to deliver the hopelessly fallen souls of Kali Yuga, and the brothers Jagai and Madai were typical examples of these fallen souls. 90% of the population of this age resembles these brothers, despite high birth and mundane respectability. According to the verdict of the revealed scriptures, the total population of the world in this age will be of the lowest Sudra quality, or even lower. It should be noted that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu never acknowledged the stereotyped caste system by birthright. Rather, he strictly followed the verdict of the Shastras in the matter of one's svarupa, or real identity. When the Lord was invoking his Sudarshana Chakra and Srila Nityananda Prabhu was imploring him to forgive the two brothers, both the brothers fell down at the lotus feet of the Lord and begged his pardon for their gross behavior. The Lord was also asked by Nityananda Prabhu to accept these repenting souls, and the Lord agreed to accept them on one condition, that they henceforward completely give up their sinful activities and habits of debauchery. Both the brothers agreed and promised to give up all their sinful habits, and the kind Lord accepted them and did not again refer to their past misdeeds. This is the specific kindness of Lord Chaitanya. In this age, no one can say that he is free from sin. It is impossible for anyone to say this. But Lord Chaitanya accepts all kinds of sinful persons on the one condition that they promise not to indulge in sinful habits after being spiritually initiated by the bona fide spiritual master. There are a number of instructive points to be observed in this incident of the two brothers. In this Kali Yuga, practically all people are of the quality of Jagai and Madai. If they want to be relieved from the reactions of their misdeeds, they must take shelter of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and after spiritual initiation, thus refrain from those things which are prohibited in the Shastras. The prohibitory rules are dealt with in the Lord's teachings to Srila Rupa Goswami. During his householder life, the Lord did not display many of the miracles which are generally expected from such personalities, but he did once perform a wonderful miracle in the house of Srinivasa Thakura while Sankitara was in full swing. He asked the devotees what they wanted to eat, and when he was informed that they wanted to eat mangoes, he asked for a seed of a mango. Although this fruit was out of season, when the seed was brought to him, he sowed it in the yard of Srinivasa, and at once a creeper began to grow out of the seed. Within no time this creeper became a full-grown mango tree, heavy with more ripened fruits than the devotees could eat. The tree remained in Srinivasa's yard, and from then on the devotees used to take as many mangoes from the tree as they wanted. The Lord had a very high estimation of the affections of the damsels of Vrajabhumi, Vrindavana for Krishna, and in appreciation of their unalloyed service to the Lord, once Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted the holy names of the gopis, cowherd girls, instead of the names of the Lord. At this time some of his students, who were also disciples, came to see him, and when they saw that the Lord was chanting the names of the gopis, they were astonished. Out of sheer foolishness, they asked the Lord why he was chanting the names of the gopis, and advised him to chant the name of Krishna. The Lord, who was in ecstasy, was thus disturbed by these foolish students. He chastised them and chased them away. The students were almost the same age as the Lord, and thus they wrongly thought of the Lord as one of their peers. They held a meeting and resolved that they would attack the Lord if he had dared to punish them again in such a manner. This incident provoked some malicious talks about the Lord on the part of the general public. When the Lord became aware of this, he began to consider the various types of men found in society. He noted that especially the students, professors, fruitive workers, yogis, non-devotees, and different types of atheists were all opposed to the devotional service of the Lord. My mission is to deliver all the fallen souls of this age, he thought. But if they commit offenses against me, thinking me to be an ordinary man, they will not benefit. If they are to begin their life of spiritual realization, they must some way or another offer obeisances unto me. Thus the Lord decided to accept the renounced order of life, sannyasa, because people in general were inclined to offer respects to a sannyasi. 500 years ago, the condition of society was not as degraded as it is today. At that time, people would show respects to a sannyasi, and the sannyasi was rigid in following the rules and regulations of the renounced order of life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not very much in favor of the renounced order of life in this age of Kali, but that was only for the reason that very few sannyasis in this age are able to observe the rules and regulations of sannyasa life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu decided to accept the order and become an ideal sannyasi so that the general populace would show him respect. One is duty-bound to show respect to a sannyasi, for a sannyasi is considered to be the master of all varnas and ashramas. While he was contemplating accepting the sannyasa order, it so happened that Keshava Bharati, a sannyasi of the Mayavadi school and resident of Katwa in Bengal, visited Navadvipa and was invited to dine with the Lord. When Kesava Bhavati came to his house, the Lord asked him to award him the sannyasa order of life. This was a matter of formality. The sannyasa order is to be accepted from another sannyasi. Although the Lord was independent in all respects, still, to keep up the formalities of the Shastras, he accepted the sannyasa order from Kesava Bharati, although Kesava Bharati was not in the Vaishnava Sampradaya school. After consulting with Kesava Bharati, the Lord left Navadvipa for Katva to formally accept the sannyasa order of life. He was accompanied by Srila Nityananda Prabhu, Chandrasekhara Acharya, and Mukunda Datta. These three assisted him in the details of the ceremony. The incident of the Lord's accepting the sannyasa order is very elaborately described in the Chaitanya Bhagavata by Srila Vrindavana Dashathakura. Thus, at the end of his 24th year, the Lord accepted the sannyasa order of life in the month of Magha. After accepting this order, he became a full-fledged preacher of the Bhagavata Dharma. Although he was doing the same preaching work in his householder life, when he experienced some obstacles to his preaching, he sacrificed even the comfort of his home life for the sake of the fallen souls. In his householder life, his chief assistants were Srila Advaita Prabhu and Srila Srivasa Thakura, but after he accepted the sannyasa order, his chief assistants became Srila Nityananda Prabhu, who was deputed to preach specifically in Bengal, and the six Goswamis, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Gopala Bhatta Goswami, Raghunatha Dasa Goswami, and Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, headed by Srila Rupa and Sanatana, who were deputed to go to Vrindavana to excavate the present places of pilgrimage. The present city of Vrindavana and the importance of Vrajabhumi were thus disclosed by the will of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The Lord, after accepting the sannyasa order, at once wanted to start for Vrindavana. For 3 continuous days he traveled in the Radha Desa, places where the Ganges does not flow. He was in full ecstasy over the idea of going to Vrindavana. However, Srila Nityananda diverted his path and brought him instead to the house of Advaita Prabhu in Santipura. The Lord stayed at Advaita Prabhu's house for a few days, and knowing well that the Lord was leaving his hearth and home for good, Sri Advaita Prabhu sent his men to Navadvipa to bring Mother Sachi to have a last meeting with her son. Some unscrupulous people say that Lord Chaitanya met his wife also after taking sannyasa and offered her his wooden slipper for worship, but the authentic sources give no information about such a meeting. His mother met him at the house of Advaita Prabhu, and when she met her son in sannyasa, she lamented. By way of compromise, she requested her son to make his headquarters in Puri so that she would easily be able to get information about him. The Lord granted this last desire of his beloved mother. After this incident, the Lord started for Puri, leaving all the residents of Navadvipa in an ocean of lamentation over his separation. The Lord visited many important places on the way to Puri. He visited the temple of Gopinathaji, who had stolen condensed milk for his devotee Srila Madhavendra Puri. Since then, deity Gopinathaji is well known as Kshirakora Gopinatha. The Lord relished this story with great pleasure. The propensity of stealing is there even in the Absolute consciousness, but because this propensity is exhibited by the Absolute, it loses its perverted nature and thus becomes worshipable even by Lord Chaitanya on the basis of the Absolute consideration that the Lord and his stealing propensity are one and identical. This interesting story of Gopinathaji is vividly explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami. After visiting the temple of Kshirakora Gopinatha of Ramuna at Balasore in Orisha, the Lord proceeded towards Puri, and on the way visited the temple of Shakshagopala, who appeared as a witness in the matter of 2 Brahmana devotees' family quarrel. The Lord heard the story of Shakshagopala with great pleasure because he wanted to impress upon the atheists that the worshipable deities in the temples approved by the great acharyas are not idols, as alleged by men with a poor fund of knowledge. The deity in the temple is the Archa incarnation of the personality of Godhead, and thus the deity is identical with the Lord in all respects. He responds to the proportion of the devotee's affection for him. In the story of Shakshagopala, in which there was a family misunderstanding by 2 devotees of the Lord, in order to mitigate the turmoil, as well as to show specific favor to his servitors, traveled from Vrindavana to Vidyanagara, a village in Orisha, in the form of his Archa incarnation. From there the deity was brought to Cuttack, and thus the temple of Shakshagopala is even today visited by thousands of pilgrims on the way to Jagannath Puri. The Lord stayed overnight there and began to proceed toward Puri. On the way, his sannyasa rod was broken by Nityananda Prabhu. The Lord became apparently angry with him about this and went alone to Puri, leaving his companions behind. At Puri, when he entered the temple of Jagannatha, he became at once saturated with transcendental ecstasy and fell down on the floor of the temple unconscious. The custodians of the temple could not understand the transcendental feats of the Lord, but there was a great learned Pandita named Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya who was present, and he could understand that the Lord's losing his consciousness upon entering the Jagannatha temple was not an ordinary thing. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was the chief appointed Pandita in the court of the king of Orisha, Maharaja Prataparudra, was attracted by the youthful luster of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and could understand that such a transcendental trance was only rarely exhibited, and only then by the topmost devotees, who are already on the transcendental plane, in complete forgetfulness of material existence. Only a liberated soul could show such a transcendental feat, and the Bhattacharya, who was vastly learned, could understand this in the light of the transcendental literature with which he was familiar. He therefore asked the custodians of the temple not to disturb the unknown sannyasi. He asked them to take the Lord to his home so he could be further observed in his unconscious state. The Lord was at once carried to the home of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who at that time had sufficient power of authority due to his being the Sabha or the state dean of faculty in Sanskrit literatures. The learned Pandita wanted to scrutinizingly test the transcendental feats of Lord Chaitanya, because often unscrupulous devotees imitate physical feats in order to flaunt transcendental achievements just to attract innocent people and take advantage of them. A learned scholar like the Bhattacharya can detect such impostors, and when he finds them out, he at once rejects them. In the case of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhattacharya tested all the symptoms in the light of the Shastras. He tested as a scientist, not as a foolish sentimentalist. He observed the movement of the stomach, the beating of the heart, and the breathing of the nostrils. He also felt the pulse of the Lord, and saw that all his bodily activities were in complete suspension. When he put a small cotton swab before the nostrils, he found that there was a slight breathing as the fine fibers of cotton moved slightly. Thus he came to know that the Lord's unconscious trance was genuine, and he began to treat him in the prescribed fashion. But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could only be treated in a special way. He would respond only to the resounding of the holy names of the Lord by his devotees. This special treatment was unknown to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya because the Lord was still unknown to him. When the Bhattacharya saw him for the first time in the temple, he simply took him to be one of many pilgrims. In the meantime, the companions of the Lord, who reached the temple a little after him, heard of the Lord's transcendental feats and of his being carried away by the Bhattacharya. The pilgrims at the temple were still gossiping about the incident. But by chance, one of these pilgrims had met Gopinatha Acharya, who was known to Gadadhara Pandita, and from him it was learned that the Lord was lying in an unconscious state at the residence of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Gopinatha Acharya. All the members of the party were introduced by Gadadhara Pandita to Gopinatha Acharya, who took them all to the house of Bhattacharya, where the Lord was lying unconscious in a spiritual trance. All the members then chanted loudly the holy name of the Lord Hari as usual, and the Lord regained his consciousness. After this, Bhattacharya received all the members of the party, including Lord Nityananda Prabhu, and asked them to become his guests of honor. The party, including the Lord, went for a bath in the sea, and the Bhattacharya arranged for their residence and meals at the house of Kashi Misra. Gopinatha Acharya, his brother-in-law, also assisted. There were some friendly talks about the Lord's divinity between the two brothers-in-law, and in this argument Gopinatha Acharya, who knew the Lord before, now tried to establish the Lord as the personality of Godhead, and the Bhattacharya tried to establish him as one of the great devotees. Both of them argued from the angle of vision of authentic Shastras, and not on the strength of sentimental vox populi. The incarnations of God are determined by authentic Shastras and not by popular votes of foolish fanatics. Because Lord Chaitanya was an incarnation of God, in fact, foolish fanatics have proclaimed so many so-called incarnations of God in this age without referring to authentic scriptures. But Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya or Gopinatha Acharya did not indulge in such foolish sentimentalism. On the contrary, both of them tried to establish or reject his divinity on the strength of authentic Shastras. Later it was disclosed that Bhattacharya also came from the Navadvipa area, and it was understood from him that Nalambara Chakravarti, the maternal grandfather of Lord Chaitanya, happened to be a class fellow of the father of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. In that sense, the young sannyasi Lord Chaitanya evoked paternal affection from Bhattacharya. Bhattacharya was the professor of many sannyasis in the order of the Sankacharya Sampradaya, and he himself also belonged to that cult. As such, the Bhattacharya desired that the young sannyasi Lord Chaitanya also hear from him about the teachings of Vedanta. Those who are followers of the Shankara cult are generally known as Vedantists. This does not, however, mean that Vedanta is a monopoly study of the Shankara Sampradaya. Vedanta is studied by all the bona fide Sampradayas, but they have their own interpretations. But those in the Shankara Sampradaya are generally known to be ignorant of the knowledge of the Vedantist Vaishnavas. For the reason the Bhaktivedanta title was first offered to the author by the Vaishnavas. The Lord agreed to take lessons from Bhattacharya on the Vedanta, and they sat together in the temple of Lord Jagannatha. The Bhattacharya went on speaking continually for 7 days, and the Lord heard him with all attention and did not interrupt. The Lord's silence raised some doubts in Bhattacharya's heart, and he asked the Lord how it was that he did not ask anything or comment on his explanations of Vedanta. The Lord posed himself before the Bhattacharya as a foolish student and pretended that he heard the Vedanta from him because the Bhattacharya felt that this was the duty of a sannyasi. But the Lord did not agree with his lectures. By this the Lord indicated that the so-called Vedantists among the Shankara Sampradaya, or any other Sampradaya who do not follow the instructions of Srila Vyasadeva, are mechanical students of the Vedanta. They are not fully aware of that great knowledge. The explanation of the Vedanta Sutra is given by the author himself in the text of Srimad Bhagavatam. One who has no knowledge of the Bhagavatam will hardly be able to know what the Vedanta says. The Bhattacharya, being a vastly learned man, could follow the Lord's sarcastic remarks on the popular Vedantist. He therefore asked him why he did not ask about any point which he could not follow. The Bhattacharya could understand the purpose of his dead silence for the days he heard him. This showed clearly that the Lord had something else in mind. Thus the Bhattacharya requested him to disclose his mind. Upon this the Lord spoke as follows: "My dear sir, I can understand the meaning of the sutras like Janmadi Asya Yata Shastra Yonitvat and Athato Brahma Jijnasa of the Vedanta Sutra, but when you explain them in your own way, it becomes difficult for me to follow them. The purpose of the sutras is already explained in them, but your explanations are covering them with something else. You do not purposely take the direct meaning of the sutras, but indirectly give your own interpretations." The Lord thus attacked all Vedantists who interpret the Vedanta Sutra fashionably, according to their limited power of thinking, to serve their own purpose. Such indirect interpretations of the authentic literatures, like the Vedanta Sutra, are hereby condemned by the Lord. The Lord continued, "Srila Vyasadeva has summarized the direct meanings of the mantras in the Upanishads in the Vedanta Sutra. Unfortunately, you do not take their direct meaning. You indirectly interpret them in a different way. The authority of the Vedas is unchangeable and stands without any question of doubt, and whatever is stated in the Vedas must be accepted completely, otherwise one challenges the authority of the Vedas. The conch shell and cow dung are bone and stool of two living beings, but because they have been recommended by the Vedas as pure, people accept them as such because of the authority of the Vedas. The idea is that one cannot set his imperfect reason above the authority of the Vedas. The orders of the Vedas must be obeyed as they stand, without any mundane reasoning. The so-called followers of the Vedic injunctions make their own interpretations of the Vedic injunctions, and thus they establish different parties and sects of the Vedic religion. Lord Buddha directly denied the authority of the Vedas, and he established his own religion. Only for this reason, the Buddhist religion was not accepted by the strict followers of the Vedas, but those who are so-called followers of the Vedas are more harmful than the Buddhists. The Buddhists have the courage to deny the Vedas directly, but the so-called followers of the Vedas have no courage to deny the Vedas, although indirectly they disobey all the injunctions of the Vedas. Lord Chaitanya condemned this. The examples given by the Lord of the conch shell and the cow dung are very much appropriate in this connection. If one argues that since cow dung is pure, the stool of a learned Brahmana is still more pure, his argument will not be accepted. Cow dung is accepted, and the stool of a highly posted Brahmana is rejected. The Lord continued, "The Vedic injunctions are self-authorized, and if some mundane creature adjusts the interpretations of the Vedas, he defies their authority. It is foolish to think of oneself as more intelligent than Srila Vyasadeva. He has already expressed himself in his sutras, and there is no need of help from personalities of lesser importance. His work, the Vedanta Sutra, is as dazzling as the midday sun, and when someone tries to give his own interpretations on the self-effulgent sun-like Vedanta Sutra, he attempts to cover this sun with the cloud of his imagination.